Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Build Your Own Program lecture. It's my goal to teach you how to build the perfect program for you and then be able to modify this program as you continue to do it to make sure that you're making the necessary tweakings to make it truly perfect for your outcome or the goals that you're looking for. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. So, every good workout program starts with a proper goal. Now, you probably already heard the other lectures where I'm talking about goal setting, why we're doing things, and really setting our North Star, knowing what we're working towards at all periods of time. Well, this is going to be a little bit more specific to the physical movements that you're trying to achieve versus the overarching goal that you may have in the mindset lecture or the other lectures prior to this one. So, the first thing that I want to start off with is the said principle. Your body will always specifically adapt to the imposed demand that we place on it, right? And to take this two steps further, you have Wolff's law and you have Davis's law. These two laws simply just reinforce the said principle. So, what Wolff's law is when the bone is exposed to healthy stress, it will adapt and get stronger over time. But now, Davis's law is the exact same thing, but instead of the bone being exposed to healthy stress, it's our soft tissues, so ligaments, tendons, and muscles. So now we know that the musculoskeletal system will specifically adapt to the imposed demand that we place on it. So let's take it a little step further. Look over here on the left hand side. You see a box squat that could be progressed to a regular squat because if you practice the box squat, eventually adding a little bit more weight, you can see how that's going to transfer over into eventually being able to perform a full body squat. Versus, let's say you're doing calf raises on the right hand side of this page here. You couldn't expect a calf raise to help your shoulder press, right? It doesn't make any sense. So, the reason why I'm putting this in front of you is this needs to be extremely apparent when selecting your exercises. But we're definitely going to get more into that. But just remember that your body will specifically adapt to whatever you place on it. So, let's talk about the different outcomes that you could be planning for when building your program. These are probably the most common that I work with, or at least people come to me for additional guidance. First and foremost, you have weight loss, right? With weight loss, you want to focus on a routine that promotes higher physical activity and also focus on building muscle mass. The reason why is because when we increase our physical activity, we're burning more calories. And then when we build more muscle, our body naturally needs more calories each day to just sustain life. So, once again, when you're doing more physical activity, we're burning calories. When we're putting on more muscle, our body naturally burns more calories each day. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to weight loss, it's calories in, calories out when it comes to whether or not you're going to be storing fat or burning it. Of course, there's a little bit more nuance. You can look at the nutrition lecture to talk about composition, making sure that you're eating the proper foods. But for a planning of the exercise routine, it is a simple equation of calories in, calories out. Or let's say you're just trying to improve your mobility and strength. You want to pick certain movements that you know that you are not too mobile in or not too strong in because we want to make sure that we're specifically building strength in those movements, right? So, for example, if you feel like you are super stiff and immobile and you're gauging that off of trying to touch your toes, well, we're going to pick things like Romanian deadlifts or static stretching, trying to touch the toes to start building up that ability to reach deeper and deeper ranges of motion. Now, let's say that you have arthritis or osteoporosis or some type of age related symptoms or something of the sort. Well, we know that arthritis and osteoporosis respond well to resistance training and physical activity. Now, the key is you have to be sure that you're recovering and you're avoiding things that typically have high impact because most of the time, with higher impact comes higher forces that our body may not be ready to take on. But this should be your, at least your green light to say, okay, I have arthritis or I have osteoporosis or I've lost a lot of muscle mass due to my age. Let's start exercising. It's safe for me and it's really beneficial for my quality of life. So, as I wrote down here, if you're trying to just feel good, move better, and you happen to have something of the sort that's related to arthritis or osteoporosis or sarcopenia, stuff like that, you would want to at least train 2 to 3 times per week, challenging the body to adapt. Last but not least, we have overcoming an injury, right? This is all too common. The one thing that we tend to forget about is when we are overcoming an injury, two things have to happen. One, we have to restore the strength and range of motion of the structure that was injured. That's a given. Most people don't forget about that one. The one that most people forget about is we also have to build confidence, also build the skill in doing the movement that we were injured in. You see, our central nervous system is extremely smart and it will start taking tabs every time you get injured. Okay, you injured yourself when you were leaning forward trying to pick something off the ground. Well, the next time you get into that position, there's a much higher chance that you're going to experience pain, not because there's a structural damage, but because your central nervous system or your brain is trying to warn you, saying, hey, you remember the last time that you were in this position? We had a huge injury, and I do not want us to go there again. So, once again, when we're overcoming an injury, we want to pick exercises that are not only going to build the strength and robustness of the area that was injured, but also build our confidence to access that range of motion again. So, now that we have like a kind of a good idea of what we're looking for, what we're trying to achieve, now let's get down to the nitty gritty. It starts off with you being brutally honest with yourself and asking yourself, how much time do I want to set aside to truly reach my goals? And here's a pro tip for you: pick something that's much less than what you initially want to say. Because at the end of the day, when you pick something that's small and you build up over time, that's great. But if we do the inverse of we start really ambitious with, let's say, 5 to 7 days per week in the gym or doing our exercise routine, and then you have to dial it back, there's a piece of psychology that's not beneficial for us. We just start to slip, if you will. So my suggestion is pick the amount of days that you know you can commit to, even if you are experiencing one of the most stressful weeks of your life. Once you pick that amount of days per week, you will now enter into the training split portion of your program design. Training splits are simply you're just splitting up your training across a certain amount of days. So, what is the goal of a training split? We have to make sure that the whole body gets trained at least 1 to 2 times, even upwards of 3 times per week. Remember, the more times that we train a body part, making sure that it's fully recovered, of course, we're going to get more results. So, and I will put a caveat here: there is diminishing returns when we start getting past 3 times per week. You have to really be on your recovery game in order for you to even sustain 3 times per week. So I suggest 1 to 2. Okay. Now, back to what I was saying is the training splits here. Let's say that you could only do 2 to 3 days per week. Well, we can break up our training to make sure that we hit every muscle group into either a full body split or a upper lower body split if it's a 2 day, or upper lower body split and then a full day on the third. And if you're kind of lost here, I'm looking right underneath the 3 days per week column here. So as you can see, if you were to do 3 days full body per week, you will hit every muscle group 3 times. Awesome. Versus if you were to do, let's say, upper, lower, then full, you're going to be hitting each body part 2 times per week. Both are great options. It comes down to your preference because at the end of the day, this program needs to be something that you will do regardless of the circumstance. So make it as frictionless as possible. If you hate something, don't do it. Pick something you love. Okay. Now, to take this a little step further, I don't want this to be too redundant, but let's say you want to do 5 days per week. Okay. The more days per week that you have, the more variability or the more options that you have, because you have more days, you can kind of hone in or focus on particular muscle groups because you have the time. So you could just be simple and just say, I'm going to do 5 days per week, all full body, or you could do something like an upper lower body split for Monday, let's say Tuesday. And then you have push pull legs, which would be you're focusing on your push exercises, which means you're pushing away from the body, your pull exercises where you're bringing it towards the body, and then legs, it's pretty self explanatory. So looking at the sheet here, this is how you can split up your workout splits or split up your workout sessions. Once you decided that you have a perfect workout split that is going to match the amount of days that you're trying to commit, now we can start throwing exercises in there. This might be a little overwhelming looking at this. There's a lot of stuff going on, but let's look at the bottom left here where it says push pull legs. So this is an example. Somebody wanted to do 3 days per week, push pull legs, right? So day one is a push. You can see that it's a shoulder press, incline press, tricep push down, lateral raise, and overhead carry. So these are just examples of some push exercises that is going to cover the majority of your pushing muscles, right? So you have your shoulder press, which is going to be focusing on above overhead. You have your incline press, which is more horizontal. Then you have your tricep press down, which is going to be an accessory exercise for the back of your arm. Lateral raises, which is an accessory exercise for your lateral delt, and so on and so forth. Now, we are going to go into more specifics later on in this PowerPoint, so I don't want to get too redundant here, but let's quickly go over some pros and cons of being kind of a generalist of doing like a full body versus a more specific approach with your training splits like a push pull legs, right? So full body, because you are covering the entirety of your body with one training session, you have to pick more big bang for your buck movements, right? So instead of us spending time doing a leg extension, that's where you're sitting in a chair, kicking your leg out to focus on your quad musculature, you would probably have to pick a squat because you only have about 5 to 6 exercises that you could do in your time period at that given workout session. So you want to be able to pick a movement that's not isolating just the quads, perhaps doing a squat where you hit the quads, you hit the glutes, you hit the adductors, so on and so forth. So the more general you go, the more general your exercises need to be versus if you add more days throughout the week, let's say 5 to 7 days per week, you can get more specific on I'm really going to focus on my triceps today, my biceps today, my chest, so on and so forth. So let's go on to the next slide. I hope this is making sense. If not, it will in a couple slides here. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I have an upper lower body split. I still don't know what exercises I should pick. No problem. Go ahead and look at this slide here. This will give you everything you need. Okay. So for an upper body split, or I'm sorry, the upper body portion of your training split, you're going to focus on a vertical press, a vertical pull. So you have an overhead press, maybe a pull down or a pull up, right? You have a horizontal press, horizontal pull, and then you can pick 2 accessory exercises after that. To give you a little definition here, you have compound exercises and you have accessory exercises. Okay. Compound exercises are any movements that require multiple joints to carry out the action. The best way I can explain it is think of a push up. A push up requires your shoulders, your elbows, your wrist all to move to get through that range of motion, right? That is a compound exercise. We are hitting multiple muscle groups with one movement. Now, an accessory exercise is only one joint moving at a time, meaning we're only really focusing on one muscle group. So instead of a push up, let's say we're doing a tricep push down. That's when you're at the rope and you're pushing down and squeezing the back of the arm. That's going to focus on the triceps, right? So, once again, for the upper body categories that you want to do for an upper lower body split, a vertical press, a vertical pull, a horizontal press, a horizontal pull, an accessory muscle group that's either going to focus on the biceps or the triceps or anything that you feel like needs additional attention. And don't feel like there's a right or wrong answer here. Do what feels right. Moving on to the lower body category, you want to at least have a squat pattern or a hinge pattern, at least one of each in this routine. So, the reason why we're focusing on these two patterns is because they're fundamental to movement. Where the squat pattern, you really focuses on the glutes and the quadriceps. The hinge pattern really focuses on the hamstrings, glutes, and lower back. So when you pair these two together, it really covers your bases when it comes to leg workouts. So if you just were to do those two exercises, you're basically good to go. But if we were to try to maximize our routine here, this is where you would pick an exercise that's going to focus on the muscles of the legs. So the big muscle groups of the legs is your quadriceps. That is the muscles in the front of the leg. You have your hamstrings that are in the back of the leg. Quadriceps kick the leg out, where the hamstring kicks the leg back in or brings the heel to the butt. Okay. Then you would pick two accessory exercises, which I've named slightly different here, which is the calf or balance, right? So you're either going to be training your calves to be stronger or bigger, or you can work on the stability of the ankle. And then lastly, your ab and adductors. Those are the muscles on the outside and the inside of your legs. So if you were to pick one exercise out of each one of these categories, you will not only have strong legs, you'll have mobile legs that are very, very hard to injure. Now, I understand if your understanding of exercise is limited, you might be looking at all this like this is a bunch of gobbledygook. What do I do here? I try to make it as easy as possible. Where if you were to go to the mobility manual, there is an exercise library with a bunch of playlists, and I've labeled them similar to what you can read here, where it will say exercise library pulls. So you can pick a bunch of exercises from the pull category, or it will say something along lines of exercise library squats. So you can click on these exercise libraries and get an idea of what you can plug and chug into each one of these categories. Moving forward, these are two separate splits that I put on the same slide here. If you look at the left hand side, let's say you're doing just a full body split every day of the week. Perfect. Instead of it being a vertical push, a vertical pull, a horizontal push, horizontal pull, like we were doing with an upper and lower body split, this has to be a little bit more condensed because we're hitting the upper and lower body together. So you would do a push, whether it be horizontal or vertical, a pull, same idea, vertical or horizontal, completely up to you, a hinge pattern, a squat pattern, and then you pick one accessory exercise for each, either the upper part of the body or the lower part of the body. That's not a law. If you just want to do two accessories for the lower or two accessories for the upper, that's completely fine. This is supposed to be your program, and your body will let you know if you're doing too much or too little, right? If you were to do a pull or push exercise for the push pull legs, we already covered legs, but this is how you can break up your pulls and your pushes. Okay. For your pull day, you're going to pick a horizontal pull, a vertical pull, a hinge pattern, which might be surprising. This is if your leg days are already packed full of a lot of exercise. You can put your deadlifts here. You have your pull that's either vertical or horizontal again, some core work, and then accessory exercises. The reason why you might want to put your hinge pattern, which would be a deadlift, on your pull day is because leg day takes a lot of out it takes a lot out of you, right? It's very energy it consumes a lot of energy. And the hinge alone will also consume a lot of energy because it's a naturally strong position for us. That means we have to use more weight to challenge ourselves. Therefore, the more weight that we're using, the more energy that we're spending. And if we were to already put that on leg day, that's already going to be spending so much energy. It might just be smart to take one of those heavy exercises and place it on a day that's less labor intensive. So that's how you'd break up your pull days. If you were doing a push day, once again, push vertical, push horizontal. Then you pick another one that does either or, some core work, some accessory work, whether it be the shoulder or triceps. Now, notice how I'm sneaking in some core exercises into each one of these categories. It's not a necessity, but I feel like it's very beneficial to have at least some direct core work, whether it be a plank, sit up, V ups, low boat, cobra, or any type of mobility exercise for that matter. Just allowing your core to explore new ranges of motion will allow us to be stronger in our daily life activities. So we have an idea. We're picking exercises, right? Now we have to make sure that they're all ordered in the correct manner. Okay. Now, this is just a general rule and it's going to go off of how you feel. But notice, you'll notice that certain exercises are more complex and more demanding on the body. Okay. And we want to put those more demanding exercises in the very beginning of your exercise routine because that's when you are fresh. When you are fresh and you're challenging yourself with a heavy or demanding routine, you're less likely to be injured. Versus if you were to pre fatigue your body and then start entering into these very hard exercises, then you are higher or you have a higher chance of injury. It's now we're splitting hairs as long as you're keeping great technique, but we're talking about some things that we can do to mitigate risk of injury. I don't want you to feel like you're on eggshells here if you decide to do a lateral raise before an overhead press. But to drive home this example here is a overhead press. In order for us to do this and challenges ourselves, we're going to be doing much more weight than we would if we're doing a lateral raise. So we would want to focus on the overhead press first because we're going to be fresh, we're going to be handling more weight, and we want to make sure that we have great form. Then we get super tired from the overhead press. That's okay because the lateral raise is very simple to do and it doesn't require a lot of weight for us to do in the first place. So you're really maximizing or optimizing your energy levels throughout the entire workout. So when you pick your exercises, you go to the gym, I want you to front load your workout with the harder exercises and then put the easier exercises at the end. And pro tip, especially on your leg day, this will make sure that you're not avoiding the exercises that would benefit you the most, whether it be squats or hinges. Because a lot of people will start doing all the accessory work and then they get tired and like, all right, that's enough. I'm going home. And they basically are just playing mind games with themselves. So now you're asking yourself, I have a workout split. I have exercises that I think I want to do. Hello, everyone. This is my kitty cat that can't stop climbing on me in the middle of this lecture. So, as I was saying, is we have our workout routine. I'm sorry, we have our training split. We have our exercise. Sorry, the cat's all over me. All right, we have a training split. We have our exercises selected. Now, oh, and we have our exercise order. Now we have to answer the question that I get so much in my comments of, hey, that's a great exercise. How many sets and how many reps? And I'm about to demystify this completely, and you'll never have to answer this question again or ask this question again. So, sets and reps of an exercise is a dosage, almost the same as if we were giving you a dosage for a medication, right? That means it's going to be very specific to you and your goals. Okay. So that's why you'll never see me answer on my comments because I don't know the circumstance that the person is asking from. So, first, we're going to talk about selecting a rep range. This is super cool and it's going to be very freeing for a lot of people. Okay. So, a lot of the industry used to think that there were certain rep ranges that gave us certain results, right? We used to think that you could only build strength in 0 to 5 repetitions. We used to think that in order for you to build endurance, you had to be 12 plus repetitions above. And in order for you to build muscle, you have to find that middle ground. And you're like, okay, well, the endurance makes sense, the strength makes sense, but what about muscle growth? That doesn't make any sense at all. Well, because it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. We actually know now that in any rep range that you challenge yourself, you will build muscle, which is exciting because a lot of people felt like they had to push themselves on these exercises with more and more weight and their shoulder starts to hurt and they're like, "Oh, I just want to build muscle." It's not a necessity. We know, and to be specific with the research, anything 30 reps and below, as long as you're challenging yourself, you will build the same amount of muscle as somebody that's doing a completely different rep range. That's super exciting, right? So let's say you're dealing with a knee injury. You know that you can't go heavy on squats. Well, that's fine. Lessen the weight, do more reps, make sure that you're reaching a challenging point where you're near failure, and boom, you now are building the same amount of muscle as somebody that is doing much more weight with less reps. So when you are selecting exercises, I'm sorry, selecting a rep range, pick what feels best for you during that given exercise. And if you're like, well, give me something to work from, start with 10 to 12 repetitions and we can just go from there. You might be like, oh, 12 repetitions is a little bit too much, or 10 repetitions is perfect, right? And the last thing that I would say here is keep in mind, we are selecting a rep range, right? So when we pick something, we can say 10 to 15 reps, right? We can say something like 6 to 10 reps. See what I'm saying? There is a gradual start and end point with our goals of reps, okay? There's going to be some sets we're going to feel under recovered and other sets we're going to feel really good. But if you just keep that north star of we are trying to stay in a intensity level that's challenging us by really pushing it, that's all that matters. So I kind of touched on this a little bit. Exercise dependent rep range. So let's say we are doing a deadlift or a Romanian deadlift or anything that requires much more weight to really tax the body. We're going to want to hang out in the lower rep ranges just because it's easier for us to focus on form. It's easier for us to make sure that we're getting close to failure, but not too much. Because I see a lot of people will do deadlifts for a very high rep range. They'll pre fatigue their lower back and then they end up tweaking it later. I'd rather you pick a rep range that's medium to lower because you can gauge your fatigue much easier. So comparing the deadlift to a bicep curl, it's pretty easy for you to understand where a bicep curl you can do reps to the moon and you'll be okay. And that's fine because that's an exercise that really focuses on or at least flourishes in a higher rep range. You don't have to go so heavy on a dumbbell curl to get the same results. So when you're going through your exercises and you feel like, man, this exercise kind of really stinks when we're getting to like 15 repetitions, I just feel like I'm gassed or I feel like it's just too much. It's okay. We just learned that the reps don't matter so much. It's more so getting close to that near failure point. So play around with the repetitions and figure out what's best for you. I always say start around the rep range of 10 to 12. It's a middle ground and you can always adjust from there. So we know that reps, we know all the things about reps now. Let's talk about sets. I want you to view sets of, I want you to view sets like this. It's the amount of attempts that you need to successfully bring your muscle to failure. Okay. When we start to view it like that, we try to maximize our sets versus just get through them like going through the motions. Okay. I want you to find the lowest amount of sets that you need to bring a muscle to near failure. And some ways that you can figure out that you're doing that in the correct way is when you get to that last set, let's say you're doing 2 sets, or let's say you're doing 3 sets. That second set was pretty hard, and you get to that third set, and you realize that you may not finish the planned rep range, or you're just going to squeak in, right? You're just going to get, so if we're doing a 10 to 12 rep range and the first two you get 12, right? But that last 12 was really hard. You do that third set and like you're at 9, you're like, oh, I'm at the grind to get this 10th rep. That is a great sign that you are picking the right amount of sets and reps to really challenge your body to get the adaptation that you're looking for. So another thing that you'll notice that that I wrote here is some clues is not having an additional aches or pains. A clear sign that we have too many sets in our workout routine, whether it be a specific exercise or just as a whole, is we wake up with additional aches or pains. And I'm not talking soreness, just aches and pains. Your body feels run down. That means your body's putting out a lot of effort, a lot of work, and you're getting diminishing returns. Okay. So if you are getting those symptoms, try to see where you're overdoing it. Okay. I always like to say start with 2 to 3 sets per exercise. It's a great starting point. We know when you do multiple sets in one sitting, you get a synergistic effect when it comes to muscle protein synthesis, just means putting on more muscle. And we know that it's not typically too much for the average person. Okay. Now, when you're planning out your routine, right? You have your, let's say, full body split 3 days per week. Okay. You could start to count your exercises. Let's say on day 1, you're doing a horizontal press that's focusing on the chest muscles. And then day 2, you're focusing on the chest muscles again, whether it be like a dumbbell fly or something else. And then day 3, we're doing push ups, right? So those are 3 chest exercises across the week. Okay. Let's say we're doing 3 sets of each of those exercises. So day 1 is 3 sets, day 2 is 3 sets, and day 3 is 3 sets. That means we are doing a total of 9 working sets per week. I would like for you to have a working set number or count around 10 to 20. 20 is for the more advanced people. So don't feel like you have to force volume in there. And also, if you find yourself way above 20 working sets per week, that is a clear sign that you're not truly pushing yourself. Okay. If you could do 20 working sets and you aren't like, recovering like it's your job, you're wasting your time. Right. And we're about being efficient here, efficient and effective so we can live our life and feel and move better. So use that as a guiding principle to see if you're doing not enough or you're doing too much, right? Because it's all about being optimal here. What is the least amount of sets that I need to bring my muscle to near failure? Now it's all about picking the right or the proper resistance. Okay. So whether it be resistance bands, dumbbells, barbells, kettlebells, and anything of that nature, that is all resistance. It can be also being in a pool. That is resistance as well. We would just have to intensify differently. So, how do we know we are picking the right weight? How do we know that we are properly challenging our body? Well, you want to select a weight that's going to make it very hard for you to complete each one of the planned repetitions that you set for yourself. If you have 3 sets of 8 to 10, you should you should be picking a weight where when you get to 8, 10 is going to be like a complete failure. Okay. If you're at 8 and you get to 10 and it was too easy, then you are more than likely not training hard enough. A cool way to know whether or not you are challenging yourself without getting too much in your head is if the speed of the exercise hasn't changed from when you started to when you ended, then you aren't going heavy enough. So for example, if you're bench pressing and that speed of when which you're pressing off your chest doesn't change after 12 repetitions, well, your body's not being challenged. It blew through the resistance so much so that it didn't even slow down. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay. Now, there is this cool method. It is for the more advanced people, but once you start playing around with it, it is a game changer. And it's what I personally use. It's called reps in reserve or nicknamed RIR. And this is simply a method to make sure that you're pushing yourself just enough to get the results that you're looking for, but never enough to cause injury or overtrain. And how you would simply do this is when you are doing an exercise, you want to keep at least 1 to 2 reps in the tank, reps in reserve, excuse me, reps in reserve prior to failure. So, a way you can conceptualize this is if your goal was 10 repetitions and you hit 10 repetitions, if you picked the perfect weight, if you were to do 2 more repetitions, it would fail. You would fail, like it would get stuck on your chest. That tells us that you picked a resistance that was challenging enough that it really is going to produce muscle mass, but not enough to truly injure you because you're always keeping that buffer in the tank. So you might be thinking, where does stretching come into play? Well, with stretching, it's really no different. It's stretching is a resistance in its own right. It's just internal resistance, where your neurological or your body, your central nervous system, doesn't want you to access certain range of motion because you haven't built confidence in it yet. Okay. So instead of repetitions with stretching, you could also do time, right? I'm going to hold this position and really reach to the point where I feel uncomfortable for about 30 seconds and then take a break. That's how you would program or plan to do stretches. My suggestion is, because stretching is usually boring for most people, is to microdose your stretching by doing about a quick 30-second stretch here and there throughout the day. You'll find that if you were to do this consistently, you're going to build your flexibility and mobility dramatically because your body does adapt quickly to stretching. And then also in how you'd progress stretching, because when it comes to progressing, let's say exercise, it's simply just add a little bit more weight, a little bit more reps, slow down the repetitions, so on and so forth. I have a slide on this later. You would add perhaps a little bit resistance because stretching, you're already at your end range. So you would hold like maybe like a 2 pound dumbbell or a resistance band to pull you deeper into the stretch, or you would pick a more advanced stretch, which just puts the muscle at a higher tension than it would be in the current stretch that you're doing. So, this is one of the things that I always have asked to me, like halfway through the program that they are running for themselves, is, am I doing this right? How do I know that I picked the right exercise for what I'm trying to achieve? Well, first, if you're trying to achieve a specific movement due to an injury, well, you can definitely judge that by if you're gaining range of motion, if you're gaining strength, right? Um, that way you can just look at your metrics and be like, okay, I put on 5, 10 pounds in this range of motion. I'm clearly getting stronger. I'm clearly getting better. But some internal signals that your body can give you are this list below. So when you finish an exercise and the muscle that you're training feels pumped, that is a great sign that the muscle is being highly stimulated. A pump feels like the blood is pooling in that muscle and it's engorged, if you will. A lot of bodybuilders chase this sensation. Now, if you're somebody that eats a low amount of carbs, you might not feel this. You might not feel a pump, and that doesn't mean that you're not training adequately. Okay. You can also feel a burn. This happens when we're accessing higher range reps. Excuse me. This happens when we're doing higher repetitions because oxygen basically becomes the limited supply, and our body starts to build up this lactic acid. Okay, that's the burn we're feeling. That also stimulates muscle protein synthesis. So if you're feeling a burn, you're doing something right. Okay. If you feel a deep stretch in the target muscle group that you are training, for example, if we're doing a Romanian deadlift, if you feel a deep stretch in those hamstrings, they are getting tension. That's what we're looking for. If you're doing a bicep curl, you feel deep tension of deep stretch in that bicep, you are doing it correct. Just keep on going. Now, if you're a beginner, you can also use soreness as a metric. If you trained upper body and the day after or 2 days after your upper body sore, your body, you're definitely doing something right. Your body is adapting to that stimulus. Now, that being said, as you get stronger, you get more conditioned, your body won't be as sore. So that indicator will kind of get faded out. Then, lastly, are you gaining range of motion? Right? We're all about moving and feeling better, right? If you were struggling to if you're struggling to do a full body squat, you were struggling to do an overhead press without any pain, are you gaining range of motion back? Can you easily squat deeper with less pain? Can you squat deeper with no pain? Um, that is something that you would have to most likely take a picture of, because it's very easy to be subjective. Like, I'm not getting better, but it's like you are. And that's why we take pictures, right? Now, a common question I get is rest times. How long should we rest in between each one of our exercises, each in between each one of our sets? This is going to depend on what you're trying to achieve here. My suggestion, because weight training has a very specific outcome, I would say rest as long as you need. Okay. When you rest as long as you need, you are making sure that your body is fully recovered. And when you access or enter that next set, you are going to be at full strength, making sure that you're maximizing the smallest amount of sets that we need to get the job done. Okay. That being said, if you are somebody that's trying to get more than just a muscle building, mobility building stimulus, you're like, I want to get a little bit of cardio in there. That's completely fine. You can sacrifice a little bit of the benefits of resting to build the muscle mobility, and cut down your rest times to, let's say, a minute, to make sure that the heart rate stays up, so we're getting that cardiovascular benefit. So once again, rest times are going to depend on your goal, but if you are trying to maximize strength and mobility and muscle mass, take as long as you need. If you're trying to add a little bit of cardio into the mix, shorten the rest times, but just remember that we might be sacrificing a little bit of the effectiveness of the strength, mobility, and muscle mass. This is what I think is the magic bullet to exercise and a busy lifestyle. So let's be honest, we all have things to do, and being in the gym is probably very low on that priority list. So, how can we maximize the building of the muscle strength and mobility, still get cardio, and get out of the gym in less time? Now, you might be thinking, like, that's a gimmick. There's no way that exists, but it does. It really does. It's just not as flashy as I probably just presented it. And that is supersets. Supersets is when you perform an exercise while resting for another. So, for example, you want to pick exercises that are the complete opposite of which in which you are just performing. So, let's say we are doing a horizontal press. We're pushing away from us, right? Well, while we're resting our chest muscles and our shoulders and triceps, we can do the opposite muscle groups because they didn't even get touched, right? So while we are resting our chest muscles, we can be training our back muscles. So, in the time that we're resting from one of the other exercises, we're still moving, we're still getting things done. So, essentially, you're getting in and out of your workouts in half the time. To give you an example, I've had people that were doing an hour's workout and they now are getting out in 30 minutes because they don't rest anymore. They don't officially rest anymore. They just decide to do other exercises in the meantime. So I highly recommend supersets. It's very good. I think that anybody that's below the advanced level should be doing supersets because, once again, we're busy, we got things to do, and this is a beautiful way of getting everything that you're looking for, um, without doing anything crazy. So, how do I progress? You might be thinking to yourself, these exercises are getting too easy. When do I add weight? When do I make this a little bit more challenging? Well, here's how you can progress each of the exercises. You have increase in weight and repetitions. You have increasing the range of motion in what you're doing. You can slow down the exercise that you're doing and add more time under tension. So let's add a little bit of examples here to really drive home this topic. Okay. You can add more rate of repetitions. Instead of doing 10 to 12 repetitions, we're now going to be doing 12 to 15, right? Or instead of doing 100 pounds, we are now going to do 105 pounds. Those small weight jumps are really, really large. So don't make drastic jumps unless it feels good and you're prepared for it. Okay. We can expand our range of motion using. So I used this earlier in the lecture. If you are doing a box squat, okay, because you can't do a full squat without it agitating you. Now it's time to lower the box a little bit lower and lower over time to a point where you're eventually doing a full body squat again. That's how you can progress as well. You didn't change the reps, you didn't change the weight, you just went to a lower point in the exercise. And then lastly, this is kind of self-explanatory. Instead of um, doing a normal repetition, overhead press up and down, perhaps you can just go through it slower. Or when you are at the bottom of the movement, feeling that stretch on your front delts, so the front of your shoulders, you pause for a second and then press up. That's another way to make things harder. So an easy rule that I like to just give people because it's easy, it sits in the brain pretty easily, is the 2 for 2 rule. So you increase weight once you're able to perform 2 repetitions beyond your repetition goal for the last set for 2 additional weeks. So this is a very safe way to progress where let's say that your goal is to do 10 repetitions for 3 sets. On that third set, you do 10 repetitions. You do 10 repetitions and you know that you have 2 left in the tank. So you do those as well. Okay. And then you're like, okay, next week we're going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to go for 12 again. And when you hit 12 2 weeks in a row, now it's time to jump up the weight or jump up the repetitions. Completely up to you. So the 2 for 2 rule is just one of the millions of ways to progress your exercises. Realistically, if you just go off a feel, you go slow, you can't go wrong. So let's put it all together because I just downloaded all this information into your brain. You're like, this makes sense, but when I put a pen to paper, what the heck am I doing? So let's go by step by step. Okay. So we're going to establish a goal. What are you trying to do? Well, I'm going to try to build a strong back that's capable of picking things up off the floor. So we know that if you're picking stuff off the floor, you're going to be in that forward bended position, that forward fold position. So that's going to put a lot of tension on my glutes and my lower back. So I got to make sure that it's prepared for that. Okay. Well, how many days per week can I dedicate towards this? Well, I have a full job, I have kids, I have nephews and nieces that I also have to help raise. Where am I going to fit some time into this? Well, if I keep my workouts to about 45 minutes, I think I can at least dedicate 4 days per week on my worst week. So I'm going to go with 4 days per week. Next, I am now going to split my 4 days and make a training split that makes sure that I'm hitting all my body parts. Okay. I'm going to do full body. It's simple. I make sure that I hit everything and nothing will go unaddressed. Step 4, now it's time to select exercises that are going to help achieve my goal. Well, I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to build a strong lower back that's capable of entering deep positions because if it's an awkward position I'm picking up off the or awkward item I'm picking off the ground, I might be in a weird position, right? And I want my body to be prepared for that. So some of these exercises I'm thinking about are dead bugs, rows, deadlifts, squats, and spinal cars. So, just to talk about what spinal cars are, because you might never have heard those before, CARS just means controlled articular rotations. Think of arm circles, but for the spine. It allows you to access these ranges of motion that we don't normally get into on a normal basis. And because you're accessing these ranges of motion, you're going to be building strength and coordination, making it less likely for you to be injured. Okay. So I picked all these exercises because they either indirectly or directly develop the core and lower back and glutes. Okay. So now that I picked some of these highlighted exercises that I want to focus on, let's go to the next page here. Perfect. Now we have to intensify the exercise that we selected. right? So as you're doing these exercises, you have to build them to be stronger and more challenging because if you don't challenge yourself and you don't progress, your body will eventually stop adapting, right? And our goal is to be doing exercises that are higher or more intense than our day to day activity. So we build that buffer of strength. So it's less likely for us to be injured. If we look over here on week one, day two, day three, day four on the left hand side here, I put the exercises that would directly build my back up in red, right? So you got your pull up, you have your deadlift, you have your spinal cars on day one, 3 sets of 10 to 12. Okay. Day two, we have your rows, your lunges to specifically build up the lower back and glutes and whatnot. And then day three and day four. Now, the thing that I want you to focus on is notice how we're also doing other exercises that just build general strength throughout the body. Okay. Like an overhead press. Does that directly hit the lower back? Not necessarily. But when we start to really build up our pressing overhead, there's going to be a point in time where our back will naturally arch because the weight gets heavier. And we have to prepare our spine for that. Right. So there's indirect ways to get to our goal as well. Transitioning over to week two, it's the same routine. And what I decided in this example is instead of increasing the weight, we're actually going to increase the amount of repetitions. So instead of it being 10 to 12, we're going to be doing 12 to 15. So that's just one way of progressing. Now, if I were to make this my own routine, I think for the deadlift in particular, I would keep 3 sets of 10 to 12, but I would up the weight because most items being picked up off the ground are oblong, awkward, and heavy. So I'd rather still continue to build my lower back strength instead of more so focusing on the endurance, which would be increasing the repetitions versus the weight. I hope that makes sense. So here's some frequently asked questions to finish up this lecture here. How often should I switch exercises? In short, you shouldn't. You shouldn't change your exercises unless you have to. Okay. There's going to be a point in time where your body is going to become so adapted to the movements that you were doing. And we're talking like maybe 6 to 8 weeks down the road here that you feel like you're not getting the same internal signals that you were getting earlier. Because remember how we talked about you might get a pump, you might get a burn, you might feel like a deep stretch in a certain area. You won't get those signals as much anymore just because your body's becoming fatigued with that same exercise. This is where the concept of muscle confusion kind of took over and went too far. You want to stay with the movements that you choose because you want to build skill in that particular movement because once again, specific adaptation. But also, too, once you build that skill, then you can actually truly start using weights that will challenge your body. If you're constantly changing your exercises, you're constantly trying to learn these movements, and you're never really pushing yourself because you're too busy trying to learn how to do the movement efficiently to begin with. So, once again, only change when necessary. And that necessary, or when it's necessary, is when you feel like you're not getting the same results that you would. So you're not getting as strong. You feel like it's not really, you're not really connecting with the exercise like you were before. Or some things are just getting achy and it's time to switch it up. Okay. But only change when you feel like you have to. Machine versus free weights. This used to be a massive debate. They're like, oh, well, free weights builds functional strength where machines don't do that. So, what I would say is do both. And they both have their benefits, they both have their weaknesses. So, what I love about free weights is yes, you have to stabilize the weight that you are lifting. So, there's really no glaring issues like when you are trying to do real life activities because you've been practicing with free weights, right? But that being said, if you're a newbie and you have to learn the exercise or how you should move in to begin with, a machine's a great way of teaching you. And then another benefit of machine work is it's very safe to push yourself to near failure. If you're one of those people where you're like, am I getting close to failure? I really don't know. Go onto a machine and go to failure. See how it feels. because the worst thing that happens is you just drop the handle that you're using and you're safe versus dropping a free weight. It's not as safe, right? Another benefit for a free weight is it allows you to access a range of motion that's unique to you. Whereas a machine, if you're not the prototypical length or just size or structure as the machine was built, it might not fit you too well. But the point I'm trying to drive home here is they both have benefits, they both have cons. And when you blend them together, you just get the benefits. So definitely try to incorporate both. Now, what should I do if I am starting to feel discomfort? Modify. You need to modify your movements. There's no point in you grinding through exercises, grinding through pain because you feel like it's the perfect movement for you. Okay. So how do you modify? Well, first, I would like to say that this is pretty much in order how you should operate out of. First, reduce the weight. That will cut out most people's problems. That's usually when we feel discomfort during the movement. Just cut down the weight. You'll probably be fine. If you feel discomfort the day after, like your body feels run down, that some things feel achy, that's a sign that you're doing too much work in general, too many sets, too many reps. So moving forward, cut down the repetitions or the sets. If I had to pick one to start with, I would probably pick repetitions just because they're easier to gauge. And then if you feel like it's still too much work, cut down a set. So instead of 3 sets, maybe just do 2 sets and let things recover better. Okay. Next, if neither of those work, we can also try reducing the range of motion of the exercise. So instead of doing a full squat, we can do a box squat. So you're cutting out half the range of motion. That might help your knee or hip issue or lower back issue that you're dealing with. If that doesn't work, let's also try changing our exercise technique. So, a great way to explain this is, let's say you're having shoulder issues when you're doing an overhead press, like you feel it like really pinching and it's cranky. Instead of doing an overhead press with your knuckles facing forward, what you can do is what we call a neutral grip press, where you bring the elbows close to the body and now your knuckles or your fingernails are pointing each other. That usually takes pressure off the rotator cuff and it puts it more so on the front delt. And then lastly, if nothing's working, don't be a hero. Pick an exercise that's similar to the movement. You're still taxing the area, but it's not giving you discomfort. And I believe that's it. So yeah, that is the last slide here. I do feel like if you take this lecture, you break it down, and you come with calculated questions, I feel like you will not only be able to build a program that's perfect for you, but be able to modify it according to your preferences and your current capabilities. And honestly, just continue to take this information and achieve any goal that you're looking for. This is a framework that I use to build programs that has helped so many people overcome their injuries. So it might seem very simple upfront because it is, but I also try to break it down in a way that you leave this PowerPoint thinking to yourself, like, well, duh, that all makes sense. That means I did my job. So if you have any questions, concerns, or anything of that nature, ask me, ask your personal coach, anybody that's willing to help you grasp this concept, because this is a skill that's going to pay massive dividends. And you can also pass this on to your kids, your grandkids, because we know if we get them started early, they're not going to run into the same issues that we ran into. Hope this was beneficial. Peace.